Olá, todo mundo assistindo o Hangout Carlotas. Eu sou a Carla, hoje com um pouco sem voz, porque eu estou muito emocionada com o nosso convidado de hoje. Nosso convidado é uma pessoa que está em Carlotas há muito tempo, ele nem sabe. E a Fabi está aqui comigo. E mais importante, o Hangout hoje vai ser em inglês. Então a gente vai colocar a legenda aqui para todo mundo. Então, we're going to start already in English. So Carlotas is a business with a social purpose. We bring the dialogue about diversity, empathy, respect, and the deconstruction of perfection through art and playful education in most different ways, through books, workshops, programs in schools. And I'm here with my boss, Fabi.
Hi, hello, Ka. How are you?
Good. Let us know about our guest today.
Yes, our special guest that we are a big fan of him. We are very honored to interview today Roman Krznaric. He's a big inspiration. We probably talk about him every day of our job. He's a social philosopher and a writer. And probably one of the person that most know about empathy that we studied. So Roman, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's a privilege and a pleasure, and I can't wait to find out what we're going to talk about.
Guess what? To start, I think you could introduce better yourself, especially saying why empathy. How did your job goes through empathy? Why you start to talk about and study empathy?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a social philosopher. And there's a question, well, what does that mean? I mean, I think of society and philosophy, trying to bring them together. And what I mean by that is, philosophy is about the art of living. How do we think about our lives and relationships? But I'm particularly interested in how we think about those questions in relation to their social impact. These are questions not just about me and my life, but how does the way I approach life affect everyone around me? And so I think of not philosophy, but social philosophy is what I care about. And empathy is at the heart of that, because empathy, about that, the art of stepping into someone else's shoes, looking at the world through their eyes. We know it's about our individual lives. It's what makes our relationships work. You can be arguing with your husband or wife or partner, and you think to yourself, oh God, I wish they could just see things from my point of view. I wish they could understand where I'm coming from. Well, what do you want? Empathy, of course. So we know empathy matters for us as individuals, but we also know it matters for society. That if you want to overcome divides between rich and poor or old and young, people of different religions, being able to see the perspective of other people is central. And so that's what I'm trying to do with my life. Then the question is, well, why do I care about empathy? I didn't always care about empathy in some ways. I used to be a political scientist. I used to study political parties and social movements. And then I had this kind of epiphany or a revelation about how you change society. I used to think you change society by changing laws and institutions, government policies. I think all of that's important. But then I started realizing you also change relationships by changing how people relate to each other, sort of grassroots change. If you guys and I can see each other, things from each other's point of view, we create a little bit of equality, a little bit of mutual understanding. And then the question is, how do we scale that up, that microcosmic approach to social change? And so I'm realizing this is partly how you change the world. But on the more personal level, this is a slightly long answer, but there's probably two more things to say about why I'm interested in empathy. One is through moments in my life where I've realized that I was completely wrong in my judgments about people. I failed to step into their shoes. So, for example, around the corner from where I live in Oxford in England, there was this homeless guy I used to walk past for years, and I never really stopped to talk to him. I never thought we had anything in common. He used to walk around with no shoes in the snow, and he talked to himself in this crazy way. And one day I did stop to talk to him, and I discovered that he'd studied philosophy at Oxford University, just down the street, and that we developed a friendship based on our interest in moral philosophy, Nietzsche, and pepperoni pizza. Yeah. And so the point, of course, is that I was completely wrong about him. I judged him based on what he looked like and sounded like. And of course, empathy is partly about, overcoming those prejudgments and finding human connection. But there's one other main reason why I got interested in empathy. And this is something I only realized a few years after I'd already been studying empathy. I've been studying empathy for more than 15 years. But one day I was sitting on a chair, in fact, in this room where you can see me now. And I was thinking about the death of my mother when I was a child, when I was just 10 years old in Australia. And like a lot of children who have a traumatic experience like that, I lost a lot of my memories from before that age, which is, fairly normal. But what I realized when I was sitting on the chair thinking about it was I didn't only lose my memories, I lost my empathy. That trauma experience made me feel disconnected from people. I kind of lost that ability to really feel other people's feelings. I didn't really cry very much or laugh very much. And what I realized was that my personal empathy journey has been an attempt to recover the empathic self I had lost as a child. Yeah. So I'm not a master of empathy. I'm trying to find it. And in a way, I think this is a deep reason, unconscious reason, why I care about empathy so much. There's my very long answer to the question.
No, this is great. This is great. Because when we do these talks, Fabi and I, we kind of run to unmute our mics to ask the question first. And I won, so yay. I'm loving this. I love that I had read it on the book, like how the art of empathy, because we really believe like the art is kind of like it's such a great instrument to show, right? When you look at an artwork and how do you feel about it? How do you feel? It's completely different things, and they're both right and they both coexist. I have a question, Roman, that I have been saving to ask you for so long, and I'm a little emotional that I'm gonna ask. What do you think? What do you think about the analogy of saying that empathy is like a muscle, where when you're born, this is like a developed muscle, and if you stop exercising and practicing it, how do you say in English, atrophy, right?
Yeah, atrophies.
What do you think about this analogy? Does it make any sense to you? Like,
yes, it makes complete sense to me. The question is why? Well, if you look at my book I wrote about empathy, I'm not sure what the translation, I can't remember the translation in Portuguese, but in English, each chapter is called a habit of empathy. Habit 1, habit 2, 6 habits. And habits are things that we do regularly, and that become part of us. And I think it's a little bit like the idea of exercising a muscle. If you don't exercise the muscle, you can't lift the weight. But if you do a little bit each day, you'll be amazed at what you can do in a week or a month. And you don't even think about it. You can lift the weight, or you can run the 5 miles or without thinking about it. And I think it's like this with empathy, that you need to make a conscious effort. Of course, just like we have muscles, we're born with them, right? But of course, we may or may not use them. If I sit in a chair like this all day, I'll never use the muscles, right? And I think it's like that with empathy, that we know that part of our empathy is wired into us, that maybe 50% of our empathy is part of our kind of DNA. But then there's a question of, what are we going to do with what we're born with? We have an empathy circuitry in our heads, maybe a 10-section circuit. But there are many things in society which are turning off our natural empathy. We know we're in education systems that are very competitive. We're in consumer culture, which is very individualistic. We might be part of political or religious ideologies which says to like some people and hate other people. So all these things stop us using that empathy we're born with, stop us exercising the empathy muscles, as it were. So I really think it's about making it a habit, you know, of practicing the imaginative act of empathy. As you mentioned art before, I really do think in a way it's about muscles, but it's also about imagination, right? And of course you don't need any muscles for imagination. You know, what you need is free thinking. And something that I like to do each day is try and think of an object that I might use, you know, like a glass or, you know, a phone, and think about who are all the people that created this thing. You know, the people who made it, who designed it, who delivered it to my house, who wash it up, you know, who mined the minerals that went into the phone that I made, maybe somebody in Bolivia. It's about humanizing the imagination. And this is something that you need to practice. It doesn't come that naturally to us to do that. Because when you buy something in a shop, it doesn't give you a photograph of everybody who made the jumper that you're wearing, you know. And so we have to discover the humanity that surrounds us. We don't easily see it. And that requires a lot of work, like training in the gym, you know. So you wearing a particular kind of spectacles, having a particular kind of vision. It really is about a kind of training. And you know, it's a bit like riding a bike or driving a car. You know, you can learn these skills. And so I think that the idea of empathy as a kind of a muscle is good, except that one might say there's a limit to how big you can be. Yeah. But I don't like to think of empathy in terms of limits. A lot of people say, oh, we only have a certain amount of empathy, you know, so who are you going to give it to? Poor people or rich people or people of your religion or not? I just don't think it's like that. I think we can kind of expand our empathy potentially a very, very long way. That, you know, our muscles can kind of keep expanding, as it were.
I love it, infinite. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's right. There's a sort of an infiniteness built into it. The only limit is our imagination. And I think it's very interesting. This is a slightly different subject, but how many artists and art galleries and people in museums are starting to really think seriously about empathy. In fact, just today in the United States, the Minneapolis Museum of Fine Art, I think, announced a big new program on empathy and art. And that's very, very interesting, because this is kind of realization that empathy is partly, you know, it's about the imagination, you know. What do you think?
Me? Well, I love it. I love the idea of being infinite too, and it obviously has the creative part, right? Of me being able to put myself and see myself as somebody, and only the trying to is already a connection, right? Just the me trying to put myself in the person's shoes and trying to understand what that person is feeling. It's such a big connection already, and so far from where we are in the world. I live in America, and we have Donald Trump as president, which we're not going to talk about it, but it's painful, you know. It's like it's completely opposite. It's look to yourself, what's good for you, and you, and you, and you, and you. Like there's nobody else in the world. But let me let Fabi talk, because she's going to kill me if I don't.
No, thank you, Ka. One thing that you said, it was about the connection, that your search for empathy, it's kind of to reconnect yourself with the feelings and what people feels. And that's one thing that when we talk about empathy, that we always listen, is that, oh, okay, I'll put myself on other person's shoes. And when I was in the Empathy Museum, one thing that's really a really good metaphor is that you have to take off your shoes to wear other people's shoes. So I think this is the biggest challenge of empathy, because okay, I can imagine what Carla is feeling, or somebody else is feeling, or why she did something. But if I didn't take off my shoes and try to really imagine her history, her beliefs and everything, I will judge or see the situation with my perspective. So this metaphor, that is to take my shoes off to put another person shoes on, it's really incredible, because for me, the connection, empathy is connection. It's to try to find in myself what the other person is feeling or thinking, whatever. But this is the key word is connection. I don't know if you agree with it.
I do. That's really interesting. That I've never quite thought of it like that, how important it is to take off your own shoes and put on, as well as put on other people's. Because of course, that's exactly what happens when you go to that particular Empathy Museum exhibit, the A Mile in My Shoes. You put yours away in a box and put on somebody else's. I guess the question is, how do we do that in reality? You know, how do we leave behind part of ourselves and then connect with another person? Because that sort of sounds almost impossible, right? We can't just sort of take our emotions and personalities and put them away. Now, we know it's important, because think of all those times where you're in a bar with a friend and you're talking about all the problems in your love life, and they say, oh, you think that's bad? Well, listen to what happened to me, right? And they say, you know, and it's because they haven't taken off their own shoes yet. Yeah, they're still wearing their shoes. And of course, that always kind of destroys the empathy moment. And so what can one do? Well, I think about it, and I think there are lots of ways to think about it, is through practicing that skill of empathic listening, you know. And I know you know the work of people like Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication, and one of the key things there is really being present to the other person. So you don't necessarily have to consciously say, oh, I'm not going to think about my own life and my own history. It's just, I'm going to be with you. I'm not going to check my phone. I'm going to look you in the eye. I'm going to hear what you have to say. I'm going to not just listen to the words, but listen to the pauses in your voice. You know, I'm going to be sort of mindfully with you in some sense. And that, in a way, is one of the keys to leaving yourself behind. But I think or taking off your own shoes. But I think there's another key, in a way, which is about having curiosity about other people, you know, and thinking that other people are more interesting than you are yourself, you know. And if you're genuinely curious about somebody else, your own kind of ego or your own stories falls a little bit into the background. On the other hand, you don't want to completely lose yourself, because, of course, what you're trying to do with empathy is find a connection. Maybe something, not just where you're different from someone, but something that you share, you know, that you might share the pain of having had a parent who died, or that you might share some experience of discrimination or something like that. So, you know, a lot of postmodern literary theorists say, oh, the problem with empathy is you lose yourself, your sense of identity, and you fall away into mush, you know. But that's not what happens. We know that. We always still retain part of ourselves. But I think if we can mindfully engage with the other person, be present, then you you really are starting to take off your shoes. So I think it's great to think about it that way. Not only put on someone else's shoes, take off your own first. Or even better, swap them with the other person. Because empathy often works best in dialogue.
Yeah. And I love it too that like it's when you are empathic towards somebody, I feel like your world expands too. I feel like we live in a world that's so selfie, self, that we end up with a very small little bubble, right? And then when we try to connect and we change our vision, I think we have like, it's good for everybody. And we really think that empathy, and that's why we work so hard with it, is it is the way, not itself, but in use, is the way to change the world, right? How when we're going to stop and do something about the refugee crisis, right? When I feel like a lot of world issues will be solved when people like use a little bit of empathy and be like, let's stop creating this great phone that fits in your pocket and is also a computer, and maybe we should put some technology on solving these kind of problems, you know? I don't know, I'm just super inspired. I don't even know what to say. Chef, where you go?
I'm inspired by what you're doing. You're putting things into practice. You're, working with young people. You're being creative. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
thank you.
And especially what Carlos said, that if we just, everyone just do a little bit in daily life, is the big change of the world. If we try to solve these big problems, one of the time they are really complicated, they are really integrate to one another. So to solve a war, the starving, whatever, it's really huge. But if we change our behavior, you live with empathy, or at least try to, every day, we can change the world, and that's what we believe, because there's no another way. If I stop to think about myself, I think about community, especially here in Brazil, I think we don't have this community sense. We almost don't care about about society. We try to solve our problems, and that's all. So if we start a little bit every day, we can really do big changes.
Yeah, and I also think that the rise of empathy, the fact that like museums now are open, conversations, and soon enough we're going to have politicians in charge with that mentality, and CEOs and presidents, and we'll get somewhere. But wait, I had so many questions for Roman. Our time is running out. So you already talked a little bit, Roman, about how there's some people that are against, right? How empathy can cause problems. Or I have a lot of people, not a lot, but a few people that I talked to also said that empathy is only good when it comes with compassion. And I would like to know like your arguments or your thoughts on people that say that empathy is not a good thing, or it can lead us to like a worst world and not a better place.
Yeah, I don't believe that empathy makes the world worse. I think empathy makes the world better. I think it's important to engage with some of the critiques of empathy that you sometimes hear. I don't find them very powerful. Like, for example, people say, oh, what empathy does is it makes you care about individuals. We get drawn towards an individual and not to a larger social problem, for example. But I think the problem with that argument is, well, the reason why, for example, a charity or an aid agency might put a photograph of a single child on a poster is not to get you to help that one child. It's that child is representative of, all children in South Sudan or wherever it happens to be. It's an antidote to the abstract and sort of statistical nature of so much of what we learn about the world. We know that all those statistical facts and things about poverty or refugees or whatever don't normally connect to people. So you use the individual as a stepping stone to something larger. So that's one kind of critique of empathy. I don't think that's strong. Another critique of empathy people have is, oh, empathy makes you care just about people from your own background or your own tribe, and therefore you don't like others. Now the problem with that argument is, of course, people do identify with their own in-group, not the out-group, people from their religion or their political ideology. But it's not empathy that makes that happen. It's the political ideology or the religion, that tribalism which does it. Beyond that boundary, it makes you try and see someone from outside your own group as someone who's a little bit like you. It expands the boundary, expands the circle. Really understood that argument. People say, oh, empathy kind of makes you just makes you biased towards some people and not others. I think it's the other way around. And I think lying behind this is that I think what's really important to understand is how social change happens, is that we don't start caring for refugees or indigenous people or future generations or people who are slaves, I say in the 18th century, just because someone gives us a fact or a figure or something like that, or you read it in a rule book that you must care about slavery is wrong. The reason we care is because we start understanding those people as being like us. We step into their shoes, we make that empathic connection. And then we might say, now what we need are laws or public policies and institutions to universalize that empathic concern. In other words, generally what happens in history is empathy opens the door of our moral concern, and then laws and rights wedge that or keep that door open. I used to do a lot of human rights activism. I've done work for Amnesty International. I've worked with refugees in Guatemala. And my own experience tells me that this empathic connection is vital for social justice. So I think that's often how I think about these things, and that empathy really is fundamental for bringing about social change. I think there's one other, people sometimes say, well, compassion is better than empathy. And I find that quite confusing for lots of reasons. I find the word compassion quite complicated because in the Christian tradition, compassion is partly, can be about sympathy or guilt or just feeling sorry for someone. It doesn't necessarily mean you understand what someone is going through, and I think that's really important. Now, in some Christian traditions and in some Buddhist traditions, compassion involves stepping into somebody else's shoes. Like in the Zen monk Thich Nhat Hanh, his idea of compassion is all about what we call cognitive empathy, stepping into someone else's shoes. It seems to me that compassion isn't a very powerful concept unless it involves stepping into somebody else's shoes, because then that's the only way you know what other people need. Otherwise, you're just guessing. So the way I think about it is that a coherent and powerful concept of compassion must be based on empathy. That's how I think about it. As we know, the word compassion, at least in English, it's probably the same in Portuguese, just means to share the suffering of another. Compassion, to share suffering. But of course, it needs to be more than just feeling what other people feel. It's understanding what they're going through. If there's an earthquake in a faraway part of the world, if you don't understand what those children need, you might just send them teddy bears, but maybe they don't need teddy bears. They need mental health stuff or sanitation. You need empathy to do that.
Yeah, I agree. They, for me, in my head, also overlap too. Well, Roman, thank you so much. These have been incredible, a dream come true. I'm going to stop because we're just such a big fans, but I can't stop. Fabi, do you have a last question or any inputs?
No, I think it was really great. I think as final thoughts, you could talk about a little bit about the Empathy Library and Empathy Museum, just as a tool to spread this message or this experience, to try to provoke people to think about or feel empathy.
Yeah, well, I think that, I'm a writer, really. And so I try and spread messages through books, but books are not the only way. And it's really important that the empathy revolution has lots of different kinds of activists, people who are working in schools, who are working in organizations, working with church groups, working with creative agencies, all sorts of things. Now, one of the things I've tried to do is set up an empathy museum, which is one form of activism to try and create a new conversation about empathy in public culture, so people know what it is and why it matters. And so I founded the Empathy Museum a couple of years ago. It travels around the world. As you know, it's in Sao Paulo at the moment. It's also recently been in Russia and Siberia. It's been in Seattle in the United States. It's been in Australia this year. We've also been in Belgium and in Ireland. And we have different kinds of exhibits, which are about stepping into other people's shoes. One that of course, you know about, which is you put on other people's shoes and listen to an audio narrative of them talking about your life. We do other things like human library events where you go along, instead of borrowing a book, you borrow a person for conversation. I also founded something called the Empathy Library at empathylibrary.com, where you can films all about stepping into other people's shoes. The Empathy Museum is expanding to do other kinds of work. We want to imagine an alternative shopping mall. So we've already invented an alternative shoe shop called A Mile in My Shoes, the world's first empathy shoe shop. We've got an alternative library, a human library. We'd like to have alternative travel agencies, empathy travel agencies, empathy funeral parlors, empathy, everything that you can think of, empathy cafes. So you can have a whole relational experience instead of a consumer shopping experience. That's our dream as we keep developing the Empathy Museum. So we find a cure for our belief that well-being lies basically in shopping. We know that it's more than this. Well-being also lies in intrinsic values, the things that matter to us as humans. And key to that is relationship. And without relationship, we are emotionally tone deaf. We can't realize our true selves as social animals. We are the most social mammal there is, but we need to work a bit on our empathy muscles to make that a reality.
Awesome. Just know that you have on us great partners in Brazil whenever you need any kind of help, connections, or anything. And we keep reading and going to everything that we can, library and museum, empathy library, empathy museum, to keep exercising
and be part of this revolution for sure.
Exactly, and just get empowered. Thank you so much, Roma. I'm gonna get offline. I'm gonna get out of there.
Thanks to both of you, and you're both very inspiring, and I look forward to continuing to follow your work.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. See you soon.
Ciao.
Ciao.